Hello and welcome to the Capital Conversation with me, Michael Hayman. My guest today is a restaurateur who straddles two great culinary traditions. A master of the art of English and Indian cuisine, he really does know his roti as well as his roast beef. Iqbal Wahhab is the award-winning entrepreneur behind the Cinnamon Club and Roast, and he's been on quite a journey. From a South London gang leader, Iqbal has become one of London's most successful and outspoken business leaders. He describes himself as a restaurateur with social meddling tendencies. Iqbal, very warm welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'd like to start off, if I may, with a quote that you said, which was that the best way to become a millionaire is to be a billionaire and then go into restaurants. Have you made your billion?
Oh, if I have, I've lost it. It must come in and out of my account very quickly.
I mean, but did you ever think you were going to go into restaurants? I mean,
No, it never was on the agenda. I mean, I obviously had a checkered childhood, but when I got through that and I went to university, I wanted to be a journalist, and I was editor of the student newspaper, and I did for a little while, but then I realised how rotten the pay was, so I moved into business instead. And even then I didn't think I was going to go into restaurants.
And what got you into the Cinnamon Club was the big breakthrough, right? I mean, that was what got you on the map. What gave you the idea?
Well, after I'd left journalism as a living, I set up a public relations company, and I went to a number of people who I'd written about when I was a journalist, and I'd said to them all, I said exactly the same thing to all of them. I said, if I go to PR, will you be my first client? And so I got Curran, Bill and Moria, and we launched Cobra Beer, had Noon Products, and we took him on. We took on the Hinduja family. And I always dreaded later on, because I always used to go and tell everyone, I was his first person to take him on. And I dreaded to be in the room with all of them, where they'd all find out that
but it was a tough experience, wasn't it, the Cinnamon Club? I mean, you learnt a lot of hard yards in terms of actually running that business.
Oh, sure.
And ultimately exiting. I noticed you've described yourself as still emotionally owning it, is something I read.
Well, because it was such a labour of love, I mean, I had no idea how to open a restaurant. I'd never even worked in a restaurant. I've never once as a student been a waiter or chopped an onion in a kitchen. And so to take on, like, the biggest Indian restaurant space in London and spend £2.5 million 18 years ago on converting it, it was just fraught with problems. And it's a miracle that it actually got off the ground at all, let alone still going today.
Do you get a sense of the lesson you learned from the Cinnamon Club? I mean, was there a particular experience that keeps you going at night these days?
Well, one of the things, a really ridiculous thing that I learned at the Cinnamon Club, and I look very stupid because it was on a BBC documentary. They filmed this moment where a couple of weeks before the launch, the builder said, "You have ordered the gas, haven't you?" And I said, "Why is it down to me to order the gas? Why do I have to order the gas?"
You have people to do that job.
And so we had a launch party for 700 people with no gas. And we had to bring in canisters and put things in the tandoor. And so the first thing I tell any aspirant restaurateur these days is
get a gas bill.
Order the gas.
I mean, but I think, with both Roast and with the Cinnamon Club, I mean, what you got there were two amazing concept restaurants. I mean, you were ahead of the curve in that. I mean, in terms of actually getting that far-sightedness to try something new and then to master it. Do you think is that something you were born with?
Well, no, I don't know what I was born with, but I come to restaurants in a very different perspective from most restaurateurs who've worked their way up. I've come in like this way in rather than this way up. And this way in is as a customer, as a marketer. So when I'm not in my own restaurants, I'm seeing what other people are doing.
So you're customer-led?
Yeah, mine is a customer-focused experience. So I describe the customer journey rather than an operational model, which with all the building blocks into it. So I see things with a non-professional eye.
And I mean, just also, so you've got the eye, but you haven't got the taste, right? In terms of there are very specific hurdles that you've had to overcome in terms of taste and smell as well, haven't you? Tell us about that.
Well, that came later on. About 10 years ago, I had an epileptic seizure on an escalator in the tube and went crashing all the way down. And on that process of going down, nerves they're called olfactory nerves that are collected here. They're the things that send the message of smell to your brain. And on the fall on the way down, I had a crash on my head, and they got knocked out. Oh. And so food has a very different experience for me as a result, because about 80% of taste is derived from smell.
Do you find that does that limit your role now, or do you think you've overcome it in different ways?
Well, firstly, I'm really lucky to be alive from that, because most people die from that kind of big crash. It was on that right down big escalator on Green Park. But it did make me look at the business in a different way. I mean, the experience I'm creating now is a very different one. Whereas before it was a very sensory, this is how every dish should look, this is how every dish should taste, this is what the wine pairings should be like. Now I'm looking at all the other things that restaurants can do apart from create delicious food.
But it seems to be that a lot of your life is about overcoming the odds. I mean, reading about your youth as a teenage South London gang leader, I mean, what got you back on to the right sort of track, if you will, in terms of the sort of the road to where you've ultimately got to? What were the key learnings along the way?
Well, the beginning and the end of that tricky period of my life are both down to my parents. Apparently, when I was born, I'm the youngest of three. My mum was a headmistress of the school and a principal. My dad was a philosopher, and Mum had brought up my older brother and sister in a very strict manner. And apparently, when I was born, Dad said to Mum, he's not going to have any guidance in his life. He's going to work out everything for himself. He's going to be my experiment in free will. And so that's what led me to do whatever I wanted.
Though, right? So you were running a gang, right?
I was running a gang, that was Self-Preservation, but it turned out to be a very profitable one. I made my first profit at the age of 11.
What were you selling?
Well, all sorts of stuff that you wouldn't want to hear about at a respectable programme.
My legal proceedings. But I mean, in terms of, but you then went on to the LSE and then on to...
Yes, so what happened was that we all failed our O-levels, everyone in this gang, because we were all too busy making money. And my parents gave me a little nudge. They said, well, look, you only failed because you didn't try. If you tried and failed, it might be different. But why don't you give it a go? See if you're any good at it or not.
So it was a simple nudge?
It was a simple nudge as that. And I went back and I got my O-levels and A-levels and went to university and did everything I went on to do. But the important message from that experience was that nobody else in that gang had that nudge. So two of them ended up in prison within a year. One was killed, another committed suicide, and the rest just did nothing in their lives. And so it's always been in the back of my mind what could have happened to them, and that did happen to me. And
does that experience explain why the rehabilitation of offenders, why you've got involved with Clink, with Brixton Prison, with a number of other initiatives that you're involved with? Is it that early life experience that explains why you're so committed?
Well, it sort of triggered that. I was asked by business in the community about 10 years ago to lead what they call a Seeing as Believing tour, where business leaders get asked to go and look at a problem that the Prince of Wales finds particularly troublesome. And one of the ones that he looked at was the rise in the number of Muslims going into prison, which had doubled in the last 5 years. And so when I was inside that prison, it reminded me about all those guys who probably had been into Wormwood Scrubs and other places, and it triggered. And when I tell prisoners about it, I say this is the reason I'm here.
But practically, you've taken on prisoners, you've taken them on when there was day release, you took them out, took them on. Actually, people are working happily in the business. They've been successfully rehabilitated. Well, right?
So some of the most loyal members of our team have been ex-offenders. They wouldn't have, typically they would not have gone into crime if they had a job. They desperately yearn for a job so they don't repeat their criminal practices when they come out. And they live in fear of going back to their old lives, and so they'll cling desperately to any opportunity to work.
Now, you've written a book, Charity Sucks. I mean, presumably, has that been based on what you've learned in terms of the charities' work in places like prisons and what have you? I mean, and is it fair? Is it true?
Oh, no, absolutely not. It's a provocation.
Well, this is a good title.
I mean, in retrospect, I might have called it Charities Suck, but prison charities are probably the most effective out of any charities that I've come across. And there was an article recently that said that the prison system would collapse without the charities that support them, and it's probably true. But it has been charities like the Clink that have been delivering people on day release when we still had it. And we've had some really fantastic people come out of there on day release who've become, there was one guy, the chef's at roast voted him Chef of the Year. And when he finally finished his sentence, he came to work for us. And there have been great stories like that.
But you are a believer that business is the method, business is the instrument to solve many of the world's big problems.
Well, this is my realisation, having watched what charities do, and having funded a lot of charities with the profits of the businesses I've created, and seen how badly they get executed. Whereas a business would use that money and control it and monitor its effectiveness much more powerfully than charities do. The employment of ex-offenders is a classic example of where businesses can solve problems that governments and charities can't.
And do you see a lot of evidence elsewhere? I mean, do you think that you're a kind of unicorn in this? I mean, or is this becoming a much more mainstream?
Well, there's one big player in this way ahead of me, which is Timson's, the shoe repair company, and they have a phenomenal programme around this, and they rightly get lauded for the work they do. I take other restaurants down to the clink. I get other businesses to come and see what I've done, and I get asked by all these prison organisations to go and bring more people in from the business section, see where their next talent pipeline could come in. And obviously now we've got Brexit, and everyone in the hospitality industry is worried about where their future workforce is going to come from. So I take them into Brixton Prison and said, it's right here, you don't have to worry about where they're coming from.
Now, we have to take a break now, Iqbal, but thank you very much for that first half, talking a little bit about your story. Right after the break, we're going to come back to talk a lot more about London of today. We might even pick up on Brexit, but we're going to look at many of the things like London Bridge attacks and the things that you've been so intimately involved with at a first-hand experience. We'll be right back. Welcome back. This is the Capital Conversation with me, Michael Hayman. My guest today is Iqbal Wahhab. Now, Iqbal, we spent the first half of the show talking a little bit about your background, but I want to bring you right up to date in terms of your experiences, because obviously roast was at the heart of the Borough Market attacks. You were very much at the centre of that, and you've written about it subsequently. Tell us a little bit about it from the perspective of a business being right at the heart of such a heartbreaking atrocity.
Well, to wake up and hear what had happened, I wasn't there that night, I was there during the day. Your mind and your heart just go to places that you didn't think existed. It's like right in front of you. This horrible atrocity went on. There was 100 people dining in the restaurant at that time. There was 60 of us were working there. It must have been so horrific for them to experience this. And I really felt bad that I wasn't there. And I only found out afterwards, and then putting the pieces together and spending much of Sunday replying to each one of the hundreds of emails and texts asking how everyone was. I mean,
if you sort of feel, I mean, I'm sure for the team, for the staff, for the customers, it must have been absolutely dreadful, but also Borough being such a symbol of world food, you know, the business of food. I mean, it was a sort of, you couldn't have had a more international centre, if you like, to have attacked.
And Borough Market is such a place of love. We have, like all markets, there's lots of banter and there's a lot of fun had at each other's expense, but it is an incredibly tight and cohesive community. And we all felt it together. The difficulty was that for 10 days we couldn't come back in. So we couldn't share what we were all feeling because we were all told to keep away. And
presumably there's a huge loss of earnings in that as well for businesses right the way through the market.
Well, I mean, we all lost a lot of money, for sure. I mean, Roast probably more than anyone, being the biggest business in the area. But at that time, our mind wasn't on the money.
No, sure.
It was on making sure that our team was happy, that they were mentally embracing what they'd experienced, and of course to the families of the people who weren't so lucky.
And how does it feel today? How does it feel now, sort of, a bit of time has passed?
Well, Borough Market, the day that it officially reopened, there was an awful lot of emotion in the air. There was, I don't know if you saw, there was the bell ringing by the fruit and veg trader who, to commemorate the starting of business again. And when he started hitting that bell, it all came out, and he just went into overdrive and smashed the bell to pieces. And does
that signify we're back?
Yes, and that also for him that was unleashing all the emotions that had been blocked up in him. And we all felt that. We all went and hugged the guy afterwards because we all felt the same way.
I mean, you've made the case that actually business has a role here in the de-radicalisation of young Muslims, right, in terms of actually addressing things like youth unemployment. I mean, you've made that call. I mean, in terms of, sort of explaining that to our audience here today, what's the action that business now needs to take?
Well, one of the things that I've been monitoring radicalisation processes for some time, because it is a problem that's getting out of control without anyone really grasping what needs to be done. Of course, there's no one thing that needs to be done. There has to be a variety of measures. But we all have seen the process of radicalisation. If you are much more likely to be unemployed, if you are much more likely to be in prison, if you are much more likely to get the worst educational grades, and you do go and see the countries in the West only bombing countries of Muslim backgrounds, you can build a picture. It becomes quite a good marketing sell for a radicaliser to go to someone who's alienated and feels outside of the mainstream of the economy and society.
But what can be done about that practically? What can business do in terms of actually helping to counter that?
Well, Muslims are twice as likely to be unemployed in this country than the rest of society. So that helps confound that fear of rejection. If companies made an active bid to recruit and make sure that the companies were seen to be open, not just at the lower levels of businesses, as they usually are, but all the way through a company's hierarchy, then you'd feel that at least businesses are playing their part to bring people into the mainstream, and rather than see them drift to the wayside and go off and do things.
But you've also made the point, right, that this works both ways, that even Indian restaurants themselves should have lots of different types of people working for them, and not be the closed shops that perhaps some have accused them of being.
Absolutely, and I've made the point many times that Indian restaurants should do so for a number of reasons, one of which is integration, that you want to be seen to be part of your community, not just being pumped in from Sylhet and just landed here yesterday, but also because it's good for business, because a diverse workforce that has always been proven to fare better commercially than one that's restrictive. And in these times, the added issue, if people from non-Muslim backgrounds, and most Indian restaurants are owned by Muslims and run by Muslims, could actually have an economic engagement with Muslims as employers and see them as complete human beings rather than something alien or only refers to them when it comes to going out for a curry, then you do get more of a cohesion and less distance between people.
I mean, yours is a call both, sort of in an interview like this, but also in your book, that business needs to stand up and be counted. I mean, do you get the sense that London businesses get it? I mean, are we particularly good in a city like this in terms of adopting the good business practices that you're talking about?
There's a phenomenal change in values in how businesses run themselves now. This word purpose has become huge in businesses, and it's been led not just by social enterprises, but by... But
is that good CSR? Is that good PR? Do you get a sense that it's more soulful than that?
No, it's... the point in my book, and I'm seeing in businesses, whether it's mine or huge businesses like Unilever or Virgin, is that it's no longer CSR, it's no longer PR, it's actually core commercial principles. And those core commercial principles, when they're seen and recognised, bring new business in.
But do you think London, in this post-Brexit world that we're approaching, could become a centre for these sorts of purpose-led brands, these businesses that create profits out of purpose?
Well, to create profit is always a desirable thing for a business. So whether you believe it or not, there was research done by Havas of 1,000 what they call meaningful brands, and they found that 43...
What is a meaningful brand?
A meaningful brand is the one that has purpose at its core rather than as a CSR add-on. So it's not bolted onto the end, but actually embedded into what the business means. 43% of businesses that had purpose and mission had reported a higher return on wallet than those that didn't.
And of course, CSR being corporate social responsibility, I mean, we hear all about it in terms of the high-minded sort of rhetoric, but when it comes down to it, I mean, things like even in your own area, in the restaurant area, I mean, when you've got government calling out restaurateurs for lack of tipping, good tipping policies, things like that, how real is this good behaviour that you're alluding to?
Well, whether a business believes it or not, their customer is increasingly expecting it of them. So I don't really care whether businesses believe it or not. I just care that they do it. And if it's a customer calling on them to do it, then if that's the driver for them, that's fine. If it's in a big company, it's the daughter of the chairman saying, Dad, your company needs to be doing this, this and this. The process by which it happens aren't as important
so
as
the customer is going to drive the change.
Customer is increasingly driving the change, absolutely.
So in terms of driving the change for your business, you're thinking about a new concept business yourself. What tells us a little bit about that?
So I've got this new idea for a restaurant. It's going to be about southern US soul food, very different from Roast and Cinnamon Club. But the very big difference is that it's going to be a purpose-driven, and I'm calling it a pro-social restaurant, where it's not where CSR is an afterthought. This is going to be pre-thought activity. So right into our mission will be a commitment to employing ex-offenders, a commitment to sustainable social, environmental supply chains, and build them in and communicate that to everyone, because it makes people want to come there.
And so customers are going to want that.
Customers love this.
So these purpose-led restaurants are going to be the big next thing. And you can use that in any form of food, any international cuisine.
It doesn't have to be restricted to any style of food. It doesn't have to be restricted to any style of business. Any public-facing business will benefit from this kind of approach, and it's been proven time and again.
Do you think it's going to be a last restaurant?
It might be the first of many new styles of restaurants.
Okay, right, so you've still got plenty to go. And when you look at this sort of great sort of restaurant story that you've sort of unfolded over the years, if I could take you right the way back now to the young Iqbal, the young gang leader that was maybe going to go down that wrong path, what's the advice that you'd give to yourself now? What's the message that you would want to give to the 15-year-old in terms of the person that is sitting here today?
Well, one of the things that 15-year-olds have today that they didn't have in my days was this word mentor. There are increasing numbers of business people going into inner city schools, not just giving speeches about how they've done well, but actually going in and offering to spend time with kids who quite often are on the brink of going into crime, or in my case, I'm mentoring a couple of gang leaders who've come out of prison and want to rebuild their lives. There are people like me around who could actually fulfill quite often what is a missing father figure role in their life and help transform them before they get to that point.
And do you remain an optimist?
Always.
Iqbal Wahhab, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Well, that's all we have time for, and a big thank you to my guest this week, Iqbal Wahhab. And if you've enjoyed Iqbal's recipe for success, I hope you can join me again next time for the Capital Conversation.